But you are starting to see some of the initial anger amongst elected Republicans starting to fade a little bit. The first thing out of their mouth was repeal.
Right.
And now you're starting to see, well, maybe not everything repeal. There's some things in the bill that are good, and there is a real problem here.
Right.
Because they're starting to recognize that, and I think on some level they might have known this, to look at the poll numbers in totality, a lot of Republicans and conservatives were looking at half of the data. They would say people don't like the bill or the president's handling of health care.
Right.
And that number went down over the course of the very protracted debate.
But do people agree with this list of 10 things that are in the bill?
Right.
Yes,
Once you start polling the specific provisions of the bill, those always polled very well.
Right.
So what's the disconnect there? I think there's two things. One, Democrats squabbling with each other looks incompetent.
Right.
It looks like your act together. And if the people in charge of government don't have their act together, you start questioning if they will execute this bill well. Now, actually passing the darn thing shows a level of competence. So that reinforces people's attitudes about it. The second thing is there was a concern, I think, amongst folks that, hey, I like all this in theory, but it looks like it's going to be really costly. It's going to cost me money.
Personally.
Right. And when the Congressional Budget Office came out and said, look, this is $1 trillion of deficit reduction, that was reassuring. And it got the Democrats, some of the more conservative Democrats that were echoing the line about it being costly, now saying, okay, this final version of the bill cuts the deficit. It's the biggest cut in the deficit of any bill passed in our lifetimes.
Without getting into the minutia of it,
Yeah.
is there any validity to this argument that the cost reductions were being estimated for 10 years, but only 6 years of expenses were being figured in, so that there is this 4-year period?
It's actually not true.
So it's not true.
Both the benefits and most of the taxes are pushed off. They're not levied immediately. The big chunk of the savings actually is not even in the first 10 years, in the second 10 years. It's a 20-year window that the Congressional Budget Office looked at.
And admittedly, it is hard to really estimate, starting 11 years out, years 11 through 20, what that's going to be. I mean, many things will change,
These are estimates.
These are estimates. Fair enough.
This is not... And if you were a skeptic and want to say, I don't believe these numbers, no one can predict out that far, hey, believe what you want to believe. Nothing is certain in this world. But the Congressional Budget Office, which is not a perfect body, but it's the only nonpartisan, fair assessment we have to go forward with. This is not a body that is in any way ideological. So if you're going to rely on that and the conservatives last year, when they were giving the Democrats bad scores on their bills, were cheering the CBO and saying, this is the greatest buy in the world and these bills are terrible. So if you're going to trust them then, you got to trust them at the end of the process too.
No surprise there. Baby killer. I don't know how good the audio is going to be, but while Bart Stupak was speaking, somebody, which we found out later was Texas Congressman Randy Neugebauer. I don't know if that's the right pronunciation of his name. I'll play it for you. He yelled out what sounded like accusing Bart Stupak of being a baby killer. It's very hard to hear, and I apologize for that. After the fact, Randy Neugebauer, however it is that you say his name, said, you know what? I wasn't saying Bart Stupak is a baby killer. I was saying this bill is a baby killer. This is like Joe Wilson, is it not? I mean, how do these things happen, and how do they keep continuing to happen only on one side recently?
Well, and it's something that I think certain Republicans are getting concerned about. A lot of Republicans have really made common cause with the far right. This Tea Party anger that is detached from reality, where hey, I disagree with this bill. It must be a socialist plot.
And there were Tea Partiers that outside the Capitol, did they actually spit on a congressman?
Spit on a congressman. There were racial slurs said. There were anti-gay slurs said.
Racial epithets, or as many blogs called them, racial epitaphs. Some people a little mixed up which is which. Yeah.
And there's this notion that these folks represent the middle of the country somehow. And again, going back to these poll numbers, because people were conflicted about the bill before is not the same as believing it's a socialist plot.
It's very different.
And now that the bill's passed and people are getting more comfortable with the bill, I think some Republicans are recognizing, you know what, maybe we're a little bit too close to all this anger. It's not really where the middle of the country is at. But every ideological movement has people on the fringes that can say nutty things. But when it's in the halls of Congress,
right, it's a different story.
Then it makes you wondering how closely tied are you to the people saying racist things outside the halls of Congress.
Not to open up a whole other can of worms, our audience knows that my position on this bill has been Barack Obama misplayed it from the start. If he wanted to get what he originally proposed, he should have started somewhere far, far, far more to the left. Or the other option I was thinking of was do an expansion of Medicare and Medicaid as a test for 5 years or 3 years or something. And if it goes well, that's extremely good evidence. It's a great case for taking it even further. If it doesn't go well, it's a disaster, and it's very true the Democrats may not get healthcare reform. From 1 to 10, where would you grade this bill? 10 being a really great bill that gets done everything that needs to be done, and 1 being almost a useless bill.
I would grade the bill a 7.
7?
Yeah.
See, I would have it at a 3.5.
Well, that's very harsh.
I think it. I just think that it came to the point where the substance of the bill was secondary to the fact that if the Democrats didn't pass it, 2010 is not going to look good. 2012, if Barack Obama chooses to run, but many say he will, is not going to look good. And that it became, this has to happen. There's just no choice. We have to pass something regardless of what's in it.
But I wouldn't say this is just something. To enshrine into law that everybody in the country deserves affordable health insurance and is legally obligated to purchase health insurance, that there is personal responsibility and shared responsibility principles in this bill. That's not a Band-Aid. That's not, an incremental step. That's a transformation of the system. Now, that's not to say it's a panacea. And I think it's extremely likely that it will be necessary to continually improve and reform the bill. But you have the framework in place. And if the bill did not pass, politicians would not touch the issue for 2 decades because they'd be afraid of what the political ramifications, as what happened in 1994.
And this is health insurance reform. To me, when I think about healthcare reform, it's about making people healthier, and there's not much in this bill that does that, is there?
I totally disagree with that.
You think this is a health care bill?
There are prevention and wellness provisions in this bill. There are shifts away from the fee-for-service model in this bill. There is comparative effectiveness research in the bill, so doctors will have better data to know what treatments really work well, and therefore not spending as much on wasteful treatments that don't have good health outcomes.
But there's nothing in this bill, for example, that's going to address the incredible obesity problem, is there?
Well, the prevention and wellness stuff certainly would. I mean, not to say that there's going to be no obesity in a year.
It'll be something.
But there are incentives in place to give doctors the reason to be pushing those types of treatments. So it's not something that they're only curing the chronic disease. Right. There's going to be more activity on the front end.
There is
than there would have been in the past.
In the last few seconds we have here, Obama used so many pens to sign this thing into law so that then he could give the pens out to the involved people.
Actually.
I'm concerned about this. I think that the signature may get challenged. I think Orly Taitz is going to come up. She's going to say the signature doesn't match the fake Kenyan birth certificate that I have, or it doesn't match the 12 different passports and social security numbers that he's using. You think that route
that will be... That is the quality of their arguments in general, but...
you don't expect that route to be explored.
He's not the first president to do that. That's traditional when signing big bills.
Bill Scher, blogging at liberaloasis.com and ourfuture.org, also host of the Liberal Oasis radio show. Thanks for coming in on short notice.
Always a pleasure.
Midweek Politics is brought to you in part by Jackson & Connor, classically modern men's apparel in Northampton, Massachusetts on the second floor of Thorne's Marketplace, and by DIF Design, specializing in custom business websites at difdesign.com. To find out more about underwriting Midweek Politics, visit midweekpolitics.com.